Alright, UFC 296 is now in the books, the last pay-per-view card or UFC fight in general for the rest of the year. This card was full of amazing matchups from top to bottom. Unfortunately, we got two of the more exciting fighters on this card in Randy Brown and Ian Gary pull out at the last minute due to illness, which was a bit of a bummer, especially in the case of Ian Gary. I know everybody was interested in seeing how he'd be able to perform given some of the out of the octagon things that have been going on. But despite this, the card was actually pretty solid from top to bottom. We got some great performances out of some UFC veterans. Cody Garbrandt with the vintage knockout over Brian Kelleher. Really hoping we get to see Cody come back at UFC 300, maybe against the Dominic Cruz. And we had Josh Emmett with a vintage performance with the absolutely devastating knockout of Bryce Mitchell. This one was honestly kind of scary to watch, especially with Bryce Mitchell starting to seize up on the ground. Bryce Mitchell being the last minute replacement, unfortunately ending up on the receiving end of a brutal knockout. One of the most brutal knockouts. And from there on, it was just non-stop exciting matchups. Paddy Pimblett getting the victory over Tony Ferguson in a fight that was somewhat competitive. Tony definitely had his moments. We saw Tony with the vintage elbows off his back, and Tony landed some good shots on the feet as well. Tony threatened some submissions on the ground, but Paddy Pimblett was just better in every single way. He blitzed Tony with the barrage of punches at the end of the first round. And from there, Paddy just dominated the exchanges both on the feet and on the ground. But I guess it was kind of cool to see David Goggins in the corner of Tony Ferguson. But all things considered, I think it's about time Tony retires. Though I wouldn't hate him having one last fight and a proper send-off at UFC 300. But it's crazy, man. Tony Ferguson, once with the longest winning streak in the history of the lightweight division, and now with the longest losing streak in the history of the lightweight division. It's insane. And then we had Stephen Wonderboy Thompson walking out with Tenacious D to their song called Wonderboy, which is pretty cool. But from the start, we knew in this matchup exactly how it was going to go. Shavkat coming in. I think now after this fight, he's 17 wins and 17 finishes in his MMA career. The guy is as dominant as they come. But I still think Wonderboy represented himself very well in this one. And he's another guy that hopefully we get to see him come back again in a more fun matchup, something on the feet at maybe a UFC 300. And now in the severely overlooked co-main event, Alex Pantoja versus Brandon Royval actually ended up being one of the better fights on this card, funny enough, even though nobody cared. I know everyone was looking forward to the main event, especially with all the bad blood leading up to it over the past week. But quietly, Alex Pantoja is proving that he has the potential to be one of the more dominant champions in the UFC right now. And with Davison Figueiredo going up to 135, Brandon Moreno no longer being in the immediate title conversation. Right now at flyweight, it might be the Pantoja era. And now for the main event of the evening, the fight that everyone was looking forward to, Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. Now, first off, I am amazed that during the walkouts, the crowd was cheering for Colby and booing for Leon. With all the things that were said about Leon's dad at the press conference right before this fight, I know the big thing on most people's minds was that Leon might come out there a little too emotional and provide all the opportunities needed for Colby to capitalize and get the victory. I never really bought into that. I do think the added pressure on Leon due to some of the things that Colby said might have done the opposite. I think it might have made Leon fight a little more carefully, just knowing how terrible it would be to come out there overly emotional and end up getting finished by Colby. So in response, he came out there as maybe an even more careful and calculated version of himself. But to be fair, this is kind of what we typically see out of Leon. He's a very careful and methodical fighter. And as for Colby, he's known for being an absolute bat out of hell right from the opening bell. But I think the threat of Leon's precise counter-striking caused Colby to be a lot more timid in there. Colby usually applies non-stop pressure, but when he does that, he does have a tendency to get pretty sloppy with his striking. And doing that against a guy like Leon is a surefire way to get knocked out. But I think Colby kind of switching up from his usual game plan and being a lot more slow, a lot more careful in there, made this fight a lot more boring than it needed to be. There really isn't too much to break down about this fight. Right from the start, Leon was just better. His defense was too good. Colby really wasn't able to land much on Leon. Leon was able to counter Colby and crack him a couple times early in the fight. And after after he stuffed Colby's first couple takedown attempts, Leon just said, fuck it, let's have some fun, and went for some takedowns of his own on Colby. Now, Leon did get a little reckless with some of his submission attempts, but after being able to reverse Colby a couple times, it kind of felt like he knew that if this submission attempt didn't work and Colby was able to grapple his way to top position, Leon was just going to be able to get back to his feet eventually anyway, so it really didn't even matter. Colby did win the 5th round on, I believe it was all 3 judges' scorecards, but I personally even thought that round was pretty close since Colby was only able to establish position for the last minute or 2 of the 5th round. But what it really comes down to is Leon is one of the most well-rounded fighters in all of the UFC right now. In the end, Leon just dominated. It's that simple. So what's next? While I'm definitely not a fan of some of the shit Colby was saying in the lead up to this fight, I am glad he's not retiring after this fight. I know a lot of people figured that with 3 losses in title fights that there really isn't a clear-cut path for Colby to become a champion after that. I still think there are some really fun matchups for him in the UFC still. Now, ranking-wise, the fight that makes the most sense is Colby versus Shavkat, but Colby has already expressed his interest in ducking Shavkat. He's looking to potentially get into a fight against Wonderboy, which is a matchup I don't love at this point. If I'm going to see Wonderboy in there again, I want to see him in a fun striking battle. I don't want to see Wonderboy get wrestled for 3 to 5 rounds. And I think that the fight to make is, if this January Sean Strickland gets beaten by Dricus du Plessis, I wouldn't hate a Colby versus Sean Strickland grudge match at UFC 300. I think even for just the press conference alone, that fight is worth booking. The only other fight that makes sense is potentially Colby versus Hamzat, but with that, I think weight is probably going to be an issue. And as for Leon, Bilal. It's Bilal. No one else. It's Bilal. Bilal deserving a title shot has been a running joke for the past like 2 years. Someone get this man his title shot already. Thanks for watching.